This is what happens when the science of the building of buildings is ignored. This very famous building in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, called the Palace, collapsed because of construction errors and the ignoring of simple science. One of which was they used beach sand in the concrete mix. Salt corrodes steel. And as a result of that, some, not many, died. Architects and engineers know this because they understand the science, because they have been educated, re-educated, and certified for the business they're in. They have professional standards. In fact, 90% of architects have degrees in architecture, obviously because lives are at stake. I asked ChatGPT recently to identify the professions that have professional standards, that they're educated to be in the industry. They identified 71, and you know where I'm going. Marketing wasn't on the list. I then went back and asked my global board, some of the smartest marketing minds in at least the US. I looked up on LinkedIn and said, what do they have in terms of degrees to be leading large-scale, sometimes multi-billion-dollar marketing budgets? Only 25% of them had a degree in marketing. By the way, that's not true here in Germany. I'm pretty sure Germany never will let that building fall either, by the way, but that's another comment. I said to a CMO recently, I was joking, I said, I sometimes feel like, marketing is a collection of anecdotes that kind of roll up into strategies told by convincingly strong storytellers. Surprisingly, he agreed. I talked to a marketing professor recently, too, who we work with, who's one of the leading marketing professors at one of the US universities. And he pointed out to me that marketing doesn't have a codified body of knowledge upon which we all agree about how it works. Sure, there's marketing universities, and many of you have, I've asked now a couple of times, many of you have marketing degrees, so congratulations, you're doing better than my board. But my board doesn't have a degree, so we don't understand the fact there's no codified body of knowledge. We didn't even know and understand that. In fact, the only thing that I'm aware of that exists out there is this, called the Empirical Generations of Market Impact. Anybody here read it? Anybody here even knew it existed? Exactly. So it was a professor at university at UCLA in the west coast of America that had actually compiled as many EGs, empirical generalizations, as he could find. And he identified that there were 125 backed up by 12 to 15,000 research papers and projects that identified that this is codified knowledge, this is solidified view. It doesn't mean things don't change over time. I want to be careful about that, because they do. But this is what we know to be true today. A board member of mine said it best. The discipline of marketing is largely undisciplined. In fact, when I showed this to somebody here, they said, ooh, that's going to create a lot of emotional... What? See? Trouble already. He's upset. No, I showed this to somebody here. I mentioned this just casually to somebody here in Germany, and they said to me that that sentence alone will just cause emotional distress within Germany. But it's true. We are largely undisciplined. We don't share anything that some of our compatriots do. So my advocacy, my reason in part for the MMA and then my communication to you today is that we need to embrace further the science of marketing. We need to develop, and it's not just data, by the way. I'm going to get into that in a little bit more, because that only brings us so far to building actual real knowledge. But that we have advocates for actively pursuing science and its application to our business. And so over the next 10 minutes here or so, I'm going to try to give you as many examples of that as I can, in the time that we have and close with what I think you can all do to help benefit them. Now, let me take a moment and tell you why this matters to me and why it's important. So I actually told a room of CMOs earlier today that I, as a child, wanted to be in marketing. It's very strange. There's a TV show, would it translate here, called Bewitched? That appear here? Yeah, okay, some people know. I probably watched it too much as a child. I don't have any idea, but I was always enamored with this idea of trying to move masses of people and create change in the world. And 25 years ago, I was asked to step in and run the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the IAB. Now, it was a trade association for online publishers who were there to develop that as a new digital channel for us. This is some time ago, right? I realized very quickly, though, that in order to do that, well, listen, actually, let me give context to it first. The challenge at the time is that when I came in as CEO, my first press release was to explain to the industry how happy we were that online advertising had only gone down negative 27%. That was good news at the moment. But I knew that what we needed to do to turn around that trajectory and to grow it into whatever size would be appropriate for it to be required research and insights, and to understand that it wouldn't just be, or shouldn't just be, 3% of the marketing mix. Now, the prevailing marketing measurement at the time was media mix modeling, still obviously accessed today, right? But the challenge of media mix modeling, at least at that time, is that it was unable to measure any new or small media. So we had no tool in which to do that. At that time, I met a guy named Rex Briggs, who is, I think, marketing industry's greatest measurement inventor. He's now written 4 books. He has a lot of expertise in AI measurement. If you haven't seen him stuff, I've learned more from Rex Briggs than anybody else about marketing. And he built a technology, a system, an approach, a methodology that we now call multi-touch attribution. We didn't know that's what it was. And over the course of 3 to 4 years, 5 years maybe, he and I led the industry to create change and adoption of that new approach. In fact, we ran 24 studies with major brands, McDonald's, Unilever, Toyota, the list goes on and on. And it showed conclusively that online deserved a larger share in the marketing mix. We basically proved, unfortunately, what economic science would have proven to you. High supply, middle in demand, it's going to be the deal of the century, which is what it was. Online advertising may or may not felt like it, but we proved relative to its effectiveness. It was incredibly cheap. So much so that we had a very interesting experience at that time. Bill Ford had found out about some of the work we were doing and was in the process of relaunching a truck. It's called the F-150. It's the most popular car line in all of America. I think it's very funny that a truck is our most popular car line, but it was then and I think still is today. And he chose to apply this new science. They had a lot riding on this relaunch. A lot. Bill Ford considered it the most important relaunch of Ford's history of all, to that date. So they wanted to apply this new science. And what they found out was that when in a split cell A/B test, perfect situation, we were able to determine that 25% allocation to internet sold another $2.5 billion in trucks. This is perfect information. We monitored the media habits of tens of thousands of consumers. We collected brand attitudinal research for them, and then we took the 600,000 trucks sold that year by Ford across all the DMVs, Department of Motor Vehicles within the US, aggregated that data, then matched it back to the media habits we had. We had perfect information of what happened when there was no marketing mix, nothing, no internet in the marketing mix, and when there was internet in the marketing mix. Online was the deal of the century, but marketers, I don't know, 2004, at this point, we're 7, 8 years into the internet revolution, didn't know it until then. We didn't have any understanding. And in fact, what that meant for Ford was it added 10% of sales on top of the $23 billion that they did. Science was a huge competitive advantage for Ford at that time. Got it? Marketing matters a lot. It can matter a lot. And my advocacy is that with more consistency, we think we can be better at that. Now, one thing that's a little nutty about all this, though, that kind of makes me a little bit crazy is that MTA adoption is still only 52% of marketers. There's a lot of complexity to that question, I understand, and yet not all of us have done it. And there's even some negative that exists around. We still believe to be a very strong methodology because I have seen the power of what this can do. You know, prior to this, when I was at Y&R, servicing clients, big, American companies from Procter & Gamble to AT&T and others, I had a boss that would like scream at us and me and my team after meetings. It was just his way of things, and that was, I guess, popular in New York City at the time, whatever. But I guess he thought that his consternation was just give him an answer really fast. I guess he thought that somehow telling the client a quick answer was better than trying to stew around what the best answer was. Hence the job I have today. In fact, we used to call it internally the be wrong but be strong marketing strategy. I don't think that would really work. So I had the luxury of working at the IAB in order to sort of create new craft. I have that here at the MMA now to create a series, as Alvin mentioned, of think tanks that delve in to the science of marketing. What do we really know to be true? And then also, what do we not really fully understand that we could understand better through science and knowledge? And that's the journey that we've been on. And I wanted to share you 2 examples of how we're doing that. The first one is an autopoietic approach with unsupervised machine learning via one-hot encoding and K-modes clustering to personalize ads. Now, to be fair to you, I had no idea what those concepts were until they were introduced to me. Okay? But this is the true science of how machine learning can be used to advance the impact of marketing in building cohorts and serving personalized ads. We had no measure. I mean, we all would believe at some level that personalized matters, but what does it really matter? We now know, based on 25 studies to date, that we've seen gains of plus 160%, and one as high as plus 272%, oddly enough, against sales. AI, when used properly against the concept of personalization, is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Now, we've done studies in the US, Vietnam, and UK so far. That's the history of it. And we've done one in Germany. So it was Indeed who did that. And I'm sure the team here from MMA would be happy to present and share that, or I will happy to get on a phone and tell you more about that. But they, on average, saw plus 126% increase in performance. So just so you're clear what that means, that's a doubling of performance just by taking this simple extra step of personalizing ads. Okay? One element of the campaign actually performed 639%. I mean, of course, Germany overperformed. That's what I would expect in their analysis of optimization, I think, at some level. But very powerful from what we've seen and understood, the kind of work we do, and then pass it on to marketers. We don't provide personalization services. I'm a nonprofit. I don't create products. I do research and insights and then pass it on to you to all understand and figure out. Now, we have also used neuroscience research inherent in a concept called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness was Harvard, Simons, and Chabris covered in some 1990 selection attention test. I'll show you what that looks like. Now, we use this for targeting segmentation, neuroscience for targeting segmentation. In fact, we think it's where the future of targeting segmentation may exist. We're still working against that. The results have been that when you apply this movable middles concept, which is what it's called, and I can explain more about what that means and how neuroscience fits into that. It's basically looking for brains that are receptive to ads. In fact, I'll show you a couple examples of that. We actually saw an increase in campaign performance plus 50% to plus 100%. That's a crazy amount of gain by just moving money around in a different segmentation. And in fact, it's led us to believe that all targeting, and this is a statement that is provocative in a room like this, I understand. We think all targeting segmentation has been inferior to date. So all due respects to what you have done and figured out, which every other marketer has around the world, we don't think we've been right. Now, to be clear, this also uses the economic science of marginal utility and a statistical technique called beta distribution with a logent function. Again, complicated concepts, underlying science. We don't have to know that. We need to understand, though, that the theory and thematic of how that this actually does perform. In fact, let me kind of give you an example of what this means and what's happening here so that you understand what it is.
This is a test of selective attention.
I want you to
count how many times
count.
the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Focus on white, count how many times. Ready? Go. Okay, how many of you...
Did you count?
You can turn off the sound maybe on that if you
Correct
can.
answer is 15 passes.
Okay. How many of
Did you see the gorilla?
Okay. Now, how many of you, some of you have seen that before, I'm assuming, right? How many of you saw the gorilla the first time it played for you? Couple? Yeah, I usually don't get more than just a few people in the room. I didn't see it. The concept's inattentional blindness. The brain has to reserve energy to focus on the thing that matters to us. It's a neuroscience concept. This is brain science. It has nothing to do with your purpose statement. It has nothing to do with what you think is a motivation for consumers. They simply don't give a shit about your brand and they're never going to care. There's nothing you can do about that. Now, I'd like to do research to validate that thesis too. But that's what the basic core. And your brand, in too many cases, more than I think we as marketers are willing to acknowledge, are the gorilla. The brain, it's not that you looked at the ad and said, oh, that's not valuable to me. The brain made a decision for you in 0.3 of a second and tuned it out. And what's interesting about movable middles concept is that it's basically focused on those who have a 20 to 80% propensity to consider a brand. How that's defined requires more explanation, which we can take the time to do if wanted. But basically 28%, those are very small groups. You think you're maybe a big brand, but you're not. Even the biggest brands are not the biggest. The biggest I've seen to date is 55% movable middles of a total population. They're very, very small. Most of the time it's 10, 18%. So if you look on the far right, there's a group here that will buy the brand no matter what. You shouldn't be advertising them. They're going to buy anyway. They're totally loyal. They're never going to change. The group in the middle, though, has different choices. They're category buyers, and they will consider your brand. Your job is to be in front of them at that moment to move them forward. It's called recency. But here's the big deal. This is what's most important. The economics of this, right? Now we're into economic theory. The economics of it, that movable middles returns $5.01. That group will return $5.01 based on the 4 brands seen below that we did analysis. We had enough data to do analysis of. Brand loyals, they're break even, doesn't really matter, okay? And small, so it doesn't matter. This is what really matters. The unresponsives, who will never buy your brand, who you spend money against, are value destructive. They are killing the business. It has led us to actually write a white paper that brand's not dead, but it is a victim of a crime. And that crime is the misallocation of spending by media. You can challenge me on the theory. You can say it's not right. I don't believe it. And I'm happy to listen to that. I would prefer that you do your own analysis and study, and we'll help you do that. We'll help you try to understand, because we don't know if the thesis is right. The same as they didn't know with Einstein. Einstein wrote the theory of relativity in 1905. It wasn't until 1919 that it was validated that everybody believed it. When he first wrote it, they thought he was an idiot. They didn't believe him. He had no backing to support that, no university backed him, whatever. He was just a crazy postal clerk of some kind. There was no reason to believe that he was right, but he was. Because eventually, his math was proven. This is math that we are now starting to prove. And in fact, in the very few studies we've been able to do an intense amount of analysis and compare movable middles, and again, let me remind you, I don't sell movable middles. I don't sell it. That's not what I'm all about. I'm just here to develop the theory and help prove out and validate and then improve on that theory. What we found is that movable middles of the 4 brands that we had good data on, that they actually not just beat every other targeting segmentation, in some cases they crush it. That's crazy. So this is the deal, right? There's a lot of science that could be applied to marketing. There's tons. Some of it we know, much of it we don't. Somebody in your team might understand some of it. Marketing is a very complex, hard thing. It's that odd mixture of sort of some hardness to it because you're making a tangible sale, but dealing with the human mind and consumer behavior and constantly shifting behavior patterns. It's a soft squishiness that we think makes it particularly difficult. But the research out there is pretty clear. There's a lot of evidence that, better data-driven decisions, and I'm going to change that notion from data-driven here in a minute just to sort of understand where I'm going. But in a really well-cited report from a number of professors at Stanford, Wharton, and MIT, validated that data-driven decisions, this is universally accepted by all professors in the world. It's settled knowledge at this point. It's sort of, to my reference, my other point, that they'll see a performance plus 4 to 6% increase in business performance with data-driven. So, of course, that applies to marketing. I think we probably have more. But here's what I'm proposing today. This is the whole point of what I'm getting to, right? Is that science-driven marketing, and I'm not here to take anything away from creative. I worked with some of the biggest creative people in the world. I love that part of our business. Science is one of the biggest opportunities we have to transform the opportunity that marketing has. I think it is an X factor on the scale that creative can have. In fact, let me turn off the slides for a moment. Just talk to you here. This is the deal. I think for years, we as marketers have navigated an incredibly complex environment, right? And I think we've done a good job with, good general manager skills. We've done a great job with storytelling. We've done a good job with some just smart business analysis as best we can. So I don't want to take anything away from that. And yes, we've done a lot with data, okay? But listen, all of you, my board is full of you. I talk to you here. I talk to marketers all day, every day. We feel a lot of pressure to prove our value. And I think many of us realize that the foundation of marketing is not as strong as it can or should be. That the standards for a performance or the standards that our peers in, say, finance or engineering, that they take for granted as minimums, we don't really have, in my opinion. So you saw what happens when a foundation's weak, okay? And when science is ignored. That's the example from the palace. But for marketing, the demand for accountability is only going to get more. It's only going to get stronger. This is not going away. This is not a blip in the moment. CFOs and others are going to put even more pressure on us. And we've adapted data, but it's data without the underpinnings of science. And what happens with that is you end up building situational context and insight at the moment, but you're not building knowledge. Because knowledge and science overrides the context and the situation. We end up with meaning, but not necessarily we don't end up with meaning from hypothesis and testing and especially sort of a real advocacy, sort of what makes a real difference. So what I'm partly saying today is that I believe that there's an opportunity that we eventually walk into board meetings and are able to say, we're not presenting just a campaign, which they still want to see, but it's validated proof of marketing's contribution to enterprise value. How do we produce profitable growth for our companies and have confidence, and the most important word there is predictability that does that. That's the future that I see and hope that we have. That we end up with a true experimental mindset here that separates cause from correlation. That we have all the knowledge, and much of the knowledge in science we have to be much better. Sure, it's not nearly enough now, but we're getting much closer. And MMA is on a mission to help you do that. That's the whole purpose that we exist, is to take the long-term view that's very hard for companies or even agencies to take on. So, my board believes, who has looked at all of this and the work that we've done now over the last 7 to 8 years in these areas, and a lot of this stuff has been going on for quite a while now, and we continue to evolve our theories and theses, that if you were to execute all that we have, which is hard to do, admittedly, that you would move the stock price of your company 8 to 12%. That's a big deal. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm not. But we have a plan, and we have testing, and our goal is to involve all of you to do that. And none of that's going to be easy. I'm telling you, actually, if you think personalization, you saw how valuable personalization is. It's really hard to execute. Shockingly, it's really hard to execute. We've told marketers for years, singular insight, singular message, and then we say, we'll personalize with a number of hypotheses and methodologies and methods. It's just not going to get there, okay? But we believe, and the research we've seen, is that marketing can matter even much more than you've maybe experienced yourself, and that's the journey that we're on. I hope you all have a great show, everyone. Enjoy.